Why do we suffer? I know a lot about suffering. I was born to a violent, psychopathic father, and to a doormat, detached, workaholic mother. I went through my entire life not understanding my purpose, then brainwashed into Christianity. Finally, after this, ready to kill myself, I became a heroin addict to block out the pain. I stumbled through life, a perpetual victim. Then, I began to exhibit strange abilities. Contact with the deceased, ultimately winding me up, imprisoned in experimental hospital, survivor of multiple assassination attempts, survivor of a literal apocalypse of my area, survivor of what you could term demonic possession, even. So much suffering. Why? Suffering, we all have heard, exists as a kind of contrast. Suffering to the universe is purely information. We call it a contrast because that is our best way to describe it. It is a contrasting thing from what we would want. In terms of why does suffering exist, this is the means of our third dimensional expansion. In the Bible, we hear that suffering produces perseverance. I would know that now very well. Had I not experienced this degree of hardship, I would have not experienced this degree of enlightenment. How do we transcend suffering? When we reach a point of total acceptance of our suffering, which is unpleasant to do, trust me, this is where we suddenly become free from it. Depending on what happens to me, for example, I may or may not have restored vision in this eye. I may or may not heal completely from different things done to abuse me and to experiment upon me. But this is where we get to what's most important. What is most important is not the fact that you are suffering. What is most important is how you react to it. Think about it this way. If you are like a stone thrown into a pool, you create ripples. Some of you could see where I'm going with this. Vibrations, frequency. Let us take an event, for example, being imprisoned and experimented upon, being almost assassinated repeatedly. If we take this and use the analogy of this as the potential energy of the stone toss into the pool, if you are the stone being tossed, you could think of it as a rather intelligent stone that decides how it's going to hit into the pool. What kind of waves am I going to create? And we do this with every action, every thought, everything that we do. Alleviating suffering. How do we do it? You must, this is difficult, you must allow yourself to feel and accept the pain of whatever kind it might be. Cherish the opportunity for the ability to learn. Look for advantages in your suffering. So, for example, I almost nearly get blinded. What's an advantage there? It forces me to lie down and attempt to get better at astral projection, which I'd neglected doing. The reason we ask the question, why does suffering exist, is because we don't want there to be any suffering, clearly. We find an inner peace amidst our suffering by allowing ourselves to find spiritual alignment in these times of adversity. Great men are frequently forged in fire, or great women, we ought say. For us all, you human watching this, to know such strange degrees of torment and deeper depths of sorrow than so many in our past, gives us all the more reason to appreciate and rejoice over those small things that we wouldn't have appreciated otherwise. The degree of learning experienced for the human who comes into a state of empowerment from a state of slavery and powerlessness produces an incredible expansion throughout the entire universe. Think of this as like the stone that is tossed into a pool that creates its ripples as it hits the water. What kind of splash do you make? It is your emotional experience, the energy of the emotion. Think of this as the frequency, as those ripples that are created, which drive the nature of universal expansion. So, if we react to suffering in a way of seeing it as something that produces opportunities for growth, maybe we can say, if I become blind in my one eye, that will constantly remind me that I need to see the unseen world as much as the seen world. Maybe had I not gone through the different things that I went through, being imprisoned, being experimented on, almost being assassinated countless numbers of times, I would not be able to sit here and to teach you these things, you who will go after me, you who have come before me. Remember, suffering is ultimately a product of your mind. However, if we did not have a mechanism to induce pain, how would we so easily denote pleasure? The advantage of the third density is its degree of contrast, even though that's what we appear to hate the most. Its polarity allows for such expansion to take place. Ultimately, the good news for us all, however, is that suffering is soon essentially to come to an end. Will it be soon, or will it be an easy road getting there? I would be lying if I told you yes on those counts. But take heart, for we have right now upon us the dawn of truly what is a new age. If you are watching this, if you have suffered, know you are part of the front line of warriors in very literally an apocalypse. We are that front line, particularly any of you who identify as indigo. But all of us, we made it our purpose to come here and subject ourselves to suffering, to save the lives of those we love down the line. Know this: he who suffers for universal freedom and for peace makes an indelible mark on all space and time. It is our reactions which hold in them the frequencies to transform all of reality. If we think of it such as how a storm ripples in water, so then think of your experiences during this time of hardship. The ripples you make determine the future. Of course, you might be thinking, yes, I understand the theory of this, but how do I actually do what you're saying? I had a similar problem, so I came up with a little bit of a list and some information for how to help alleviate sufferings in the meantime as we go through them. One of the most important things that has been told to me repeatedly is hold on. In the midst of suffering, what we must do is know that your soul is eternal, that it cannot be broken, it cannot be bent, it cannot be shut down, it cannot be stopped. This concept of holding within yourself, holding a resolve, this is one thing that has carried me through this. Again, also sink into the feeling of the discomfort. When you accept, oh, this discomfort exists, I have no resistance to it, then immediately it no longer has power over you. Anything that we feel is done to us is really that which we do ourselves. Once we fully implement this concept, you can never truly ever be harmed again. We, you could say, are like famous actors, heroes and heroines, who persevered throughout history. We are now the stars in our own movies, the actors of our own play. Another thing that you can do when in a state of suffering, attempt to sense your chakra centers. If you can, attempt to sense their energetic output and where it is located. You don't need to necessarily even know how to do this. Just focus on the concept of what kind of energy am I emitting. You will suffer immediately ceasing as soon as you think to yourself, all right, what lower chakra-based energy am I generating? And how do I generate other energy instead? As soon as you no longer provide that energy to exist inside your vibration, you can have practically one of your eyes stuck out like me, and you do not suffer through the experience, despite though it may be painful. This is a confusing concept. But I will prove that it is possible. Now, remember also, when these particular areas are allowed to reign in their natures, these lower chakras, this gives rise to more and more suffering to be created, because if you're experiencing emotions constantly of fear or anger or pain in general, then you create more of that where you place your focus is going to increase. So if you place focus on more and more and more pain existing, then that is what will exist. How would I be able to do any of this in general, though? One of the main things I think that is allowed to let me do this in general has been the cultivation of discipline. How do we do this? Discipline is something I was fortunate to have exposure to as a child. It was through the martial arts and through exercise. You can also do this through yoga, through whatever tasks, though it seems like exercise, martial arts, and yoga are the best way to start. Different types of things which engage our ability to focus strongly, to train the mind, to train its different capacities. I knew, had it not been the level of discipline that I had begun to force myself to work, to completely begin to pull myself up out of the chains that had bound me, I knew that had it not been for that discipline, I would have walked out of the optometrist's office with far more than a half nearly blinded eye. This also, when we suffer for the sake of those who are not as strong as we, with the ability to sustain such attacks. Why we suffer, we already know. It is the expansion of the universe. But the question instead should be, why should we still suffer? Why should we still suffer? We are passing an age in which suffering existed. Suffering need no longer exist. It is an archaic concept, as archaic as karma, as one teacher will tell you. And so I will say, if karma is an archaic concept, you'd better believe suffering is one archaic concept. To suffer or not to suffer? That is the question. But why the heck would you pick to suffer when you could pick to do otherwise? It's a difficult road. The road out of suffering. The road not taken. The road where you are constantly exposed to all kinds of things in your environment that might give rise for you to suffer. But that's just the old way passing away. The ways of the old world passing away, trying feebly to maintain their grasp. Why have we suffered this entire time? Throughout these thousands of years, we've suffered to get us into this point right now. We've suffered so that we will finally and truly be free. I'll see you next time on Arcturian Philosophy.